Hello from Gardening at Douentza here in Ireland, and today's specialised video is about Epiphyllum, early spring care of Epiphyllum. Now I know a number of you grow epis and are very interested in getting them to flower well. So in early spring, Epiphyllums are getting ready to flower. So in this video I'm going to lead you through my routine for ensuring I get the best from my plants. The plants, known as Epiphyllum, cactus orchids or just epis, are widely grown for their flowers, and I grow a lot of them here in my greenhouse. Now, these plants are artificial hybrids of species within the cacti group called Hylocereae. Within the Hylocereae group, three main species of cactus are used in epi-hybridization, and these species are Disocactus, Pseudorhipsalis and Selenicerus. Now, there is a genus of cactus called Epiphyllum, but surprisingly and confusingly, this genus isn't overly used in making Epiphyllum hybrids. Epiphyllum cacti are mostly epiphytic plants growing on trees, and they have a symbiotic relationship with those trees. Epiphyllum hybrids produce large, showy flowers, which are usually sweetly scented, and they last for 2 days or more. Now, in terms of the plant name, the word epiphyllum means upon the leaf. But this is ironic, as orchid cactus don't actually have leaves. Their flowers, they form directly on the branches of the plant, which is the way with all cacti. In nature, epi blooms appear at night, but in the 1800s, plant hunters sought out specimens that bloomed in the day, and botanists continued to crossbreed in an attempt to create more day bloomers. In the wild, most still bloom only at night. In terms of recording the numerous beautiful cultivars out there, that's the job of the Epiphyllum Society of America. It is the international registration authority for hybrids of the tribe Hylocereae, and it maintains a list of well over 7,000 Epiphyllum hybrids and species from that genus. So now let's talk about spring care of these beautiful plants, and I have 17 plants in total in my collection, the oldest being 13 years old, and I keep them here in my greenhouse where the winter temperature is artificially controlled so that it never dips below 5 degrees Celsius, so that's 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Apart from this intervention, my epis must make do with the light and temperature fluctuations that the Irish climate provides. In winter, my epis are kept bone dry from about November to March, and this enables them to tolerate the winter low. The drier the plant is kept, the better able it is to tolerate low temperatures. Now, if you read up about epis in the RHS guide, for example, it'll say that they're hardy to about 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 Fahrenheit. But mine do well despite having to tolerate half these temperatures in winter, and they do fine. However, if you are growing your epis indoors, then you don't need to worry about keeping them bone dry in winter. So growing them indoors, you should continue watering through winter whenever the plants dry out, giving them a little water rather than soaking them completely at each watering. And in a moment, I'll let you know what you should be doing with your epis now, whether you keep them indoors or in a frost-free greenhouse like I do. So do bear in mind, if growing indoors, that to encourage blooming, plants need to be kept in a cooler room in winter, about 11 to 14 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, 52 to 57 Fahrenheit. But for my epis, which are kept in my frost-free greenhouse, the temperature dip happens naturally and I don't need to worry about this at all. Now, epis require at least 15 degrees Celsius, which is 60 Fahrenheit, during the growing season, and they should be placed in bright filtered light. In Ireland, they can be placed in full sun. So now it's March and my epis, which have been kept bone dry, as I said, all winter, need to be coaxed awake. And I start off by giving them just a little bit of water. I do this in the morning or the early afternoon on a day when the temperatures are not due to dip particularly low at night. And I leave the plants for a few days before giving them another drop of water. And then gradually I up the frequency and quantity of water until I'm watering my epis whenever they dry out completely, which is the way to continue through the growing season. It's important to do this job gradually so that the plants have a chance to get used to water again. Now, if your epis have been kept indoors, then from late February you should increase the volume of water, but always ensuring that your plant dries out completely between waterings, and try not to splash the plant as you water. Now, at this point in time, you may notice a few problems with your epiphyllums, and limpness is one of those. It's a sign of a lack of water. And it's important not to panic if you see this and try to address it by drowning your plant in water. Overwatering at this stage is a surefire way to kill the plant off. So your plant is going to be fine so long as you gradually introduce water, allowing the plant's roots to get used to absorbing water again. And the second problem you may encounter at this time is that you find that your epi has taken on a leggy or weak appearance, and this means it needs more light. Move it to a brighter position. And the opposite to this is that your plant has very reddened leaves, which means it is getting a lot of light, but this in itself, it's nothing much to worry about. Now, another problem you may notice with your epis is spotting on the stems. So remember, epis don't have leaves, they have stems, and the flowers come from those stems. The spots, they can be due to a variety of causes. They can be due to scale, in which case you need to treat the scale. They can be due to a virus, and I don't think there's really much you can do about that. They can be due to too much nitrogen in your fertilizer. But spotting, it's a breakdown of the cell structure in an epiphyllum plant tissue, and it causes brown or black spots on your plant on the branches. And although testing has been done, there's no definitive cause for why spotting occurs in some epiphyllum hybrids. Now, some varieties are known to really suffer from this spotting. Cultivars like Clown and Sonoma, for example, they are real martyrs for it, and they can be very hard to grow. So there's no cure for spotting, but there are a few steps you can take to minimise its overall effect. And one of those steps is to pay attention to your nitrogen. And that brings me on to the second thing you need to do at this time of year with your epiphyllums. In spring, you need to restart fertilizing. So if your epis are kept indoors, then you can restart fertilizing at the end of February. But if they're kept cooler, like mine, then start in March. Now, fertilizer needs to be applied every 2 weeks from now until autumn, and you can use cactus fertilizer if you want. Alternatively, you can use a well-balanced liquid fertilizer with a 10-10-10 formula. Now, this formulation refers to the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and is otherwise known as NPK, K being the symbol for potassium. The nitrogen percentage is important because high nitrogen has been linked to spotting in various varieties, in various cultivars that are prone to that spotting in the first place. So liquid fertilizers, they always have the NPK percentage written somewhere on the bottle, so look for that. And I can say that it isn't anything I've paid particular attention to with my epis in the past, but I do have spots, so I'm going to pay more attention to this in the future. The other thing that you could do now with your epis is to prune them if they need it, especially if you're growing indoors. And pruning can be done any time of year really during the active growth season. But if you prune now, your plant has the best chance of regrowing by the end of the summer. Never do extensive pruning at low temperatures. And before starting to prune, do bear in mind that some hybrids are just more compact than others. So many have it in their nature to grow long, ungainly stems, and that helps them to hang on trees if they were in the wild. But they grow that way, and there's nothing you can do about it to change it. So if you cut these long stems in half, what you will end up doing really is just cut off flowers, and you'll get no blooms that year, and then the next year your plant will just regrow its stems again, and you'll be back to the same position that you were in before. So just bearing that in mind, but it is worth noting that proper pruning can lead to stronger leaves, or stronger stems, should I say, and less floppiness, so it's worth doing. Now first, what you'll need to do is to wear gloves, because as we all know, many epiphyllums are covered in tiny deadly spines, and you don't need to get those in your hands. And use a sharp sterilised secateurs, and preferably sterilise between each plant. Cut out any small damaged stems or wimpy growth. And stems like this one here are too thin and less healthy than ones that are fat, like this fatty here. So cut either at the base of the stem, in which case it will not regrow, or cut off the damaged portion at the end of a stem, in which case the plant will resprout and probably branch from that point. Prune your plant with symmetry in mind, and watch out not to cut off any stems with flower buds. Now, most of my plants here are fine and don't need any pruning just now, but as one final thought, do be careful, because a dehydrated plant can masquerade as one producing weak growth. And you shouldn't cut off dehydrated stems just because they're dehydrated. They will plump up again once watering resumes properly. So if you have a very vigorous plant, you may find that stems branch. You can prune branching stems that have 4 or more branches by clipping off a branch and leaving a maximum of 3 branches. Now, I don't have any plant as vigorous as that to show you here at the moment, but what I mean can be seen here with this stem, which has branched in 2. And in vigorous plants, this might actually branch into 4 separate stems. Now, don't worry about the open cuts, they'll heal quickly enough, but do make sure not to splash any water on them when you're watering your plant and they're healing. And then finally, be careful not to overwater after pruning. So as you can imagine, a big plant that's had a lot of its material removed, its water requirements are reduced, so just bear that in mind when watering. Now, any stem pieces of 15 to 22 centimetres, which is 6 to 9 inches, can be used as cutting material. And what you need to do is to let that callus over for several days in a warm place, and then fill a pot with 1/3 of cactus compost and cover with a layer of grit. Insert the cuttings to a depth of 1 to 2 inches and make sure the bottom of the stem is in the mix. And make sure that you've planted your cutting the correct way up. So the bottom of the stem needs to be the one that you bury in the mix. If you plant them upside down, then they just won't grow. So keep the compost just moist and maintain a temperature of 18 to 24 degrees centigrade, which is 65 to 75 Fahrenheit. And your cuttings should root in 3 to 6 weeks and may even flower a few years later, 2 years later. And then finally, just by way of completeness, I thought I should just mention a little bit about potting, although I did cover this in one of the Q&A live streams that I did a while ago. So epis can be big, unwieldy plants. A terracotta pot is a great idea in that case because it just weighs the plant down and stops it tipping over and breaking. Alternatively, what you can do is plant your plants in big hanging baskets. And the best time to repot is about a month after blooming. So don't fret about removing all the old soil from the root ball. Best to just leave it as is and use a relatively small pot. Epis like to be slightly root bound in their pot. And in terms of the mix that you use, it needs to be really well drained. So I use 50% inorganic materials. So that's perlite, horticultural sand and vermiculite. And as a general rule of thumb, the warmer your climate, the more organic material you can use in your mix, because plants, they dry out more quickly in sunnier places. But on no account should your plants be left sitting in water. And that kind of brings me to the end of this video about spring care of epiphyllums, a plant we just love to grow, and all that remains now is to wait for these little babies to burst into glorious flower, and I do hope it will be a really good season for them and for me. Thank you as always for watching, and I wish you much growing success with your own epiphyllums at home. Bye!